Welcome to Terror Tales.
I had never been one to believe in ghost stories or urban legends, but that all changed when I checked into the Grand Meridian Hotel. It was supposed to be a routine business trip, just a few nights in a standard hotel room. But what I experienced there shattered everything I thought I knew about the world. The Grand Meridian was an old hotel, towering over the city with an air of faded grandeur. Its once majestic facade was now weathered and worn, the marble columns chipped, and the large windows clouded with years of neglect. Still, it had a reputation as one of the city's premier hotels, and I had no reason to think it would be anything less than satisfactory. I arrived late in the evening, exhausted from a long day of meetings. The lobby was grand, with chandeliers that had seen better days, and a long, polished counter where a lone clerk stood. He was a thin, pale man with dark circles under his eyes, and his smile didn't quite reach them when I approached. "Good evening," he greeted me with a voice that matched his appearance, hollow and worn. "How may I assist you?" I gave him my name and reservation details. His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place, but he quickly composed himself. Yes. "Mr. Harrison," he said, typing something into the ancient computer in front of him. "You're in room 666. The number caught me off guard. I hesitated for a moment, but then I mentally chided myself. It was just a number, nothing more. Superstitions were not something I subscribed to. "Here's your key," the clerk said, handing me an old-fashioned metal key with the number 666 engraved on it. "Enjoy your stay." There was something unsettling in his tone, but I brushed it off as my own fatigue playing tricks on me. I took the key, nodded, and made my way to the elevator. The ride up to the 6th floor was smooth, the soft hum of the elevator music doing little to ease the growing sense of unease that settled over me. When the doors slid open, I stepped out into a dimly lit hallway. The carpet was a deep crimson, and the wallpaper was an intricate pattern of gold and burgundy, but the colors had dulled with age. I found room 666 at the end of the corridor. The door was a heavy, dark wood, with the brass numbers gleaming faintly in the dim light. As I inserted the key into the lock, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a room that seemed stuck in time. The decor was old-fashioned, with heavy drapes, a large ornate bed, and dark wood furniture. A faint smell of dust and something else, something I couldn't quite identify, lingered in the air. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The room was quiet, eerily so. It was as if the thick walls absorbed all sound, leaving only a heavy silence that pressed down on me. I tossed my suitcase onto the bed and started to unpack, trying to shake the unease that clung to me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The room felt off, as if it were watching me, waiting. I dismissed the thought and decided to take a quick shower before bed. The bathroom was just as dated as the rest of the room, with old tiles and a clawfoot tub that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The mirror above the sink was cloudy, and when I wiped it with my hand, I noticed a faint crack running through it. As I stepped into the shower, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air felt heavy, oppressive, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than once, half expecting to see someone or something standing behind me. But there was nothing, just my imagination running wild in an unfamiliar place, I told myself. After my shower, I climbed into bed, hoping that sleep would come quickly. But as I lay there in the darkness, the silence of the room became unbearable. Every creak, every rustle of the drapes seemed magnified. My heart raced as I stared up at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. Hours passed and sleep remained elusive. I tossed and turned, but every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it. That presence, that sense of being observed. The room felt alive, as if it were breathing, pulsating with some unseen energy. And then, I heard it. A faint whisper, so soft I almost thought I imagined it. But it was there, unmistakable. A voice barely audible, coming from somewhere in the room. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" Silence. I reached for the bedside lamp, fumbling in the dark until I found the switch. The warm glow of the lamp did little to chase away the shadows that clung to the corners of the room. I sat there for what felt like hours, listening, waiting. But the whispering had stopped, and the room was still once more. Eventually, exhaustion overcame my fear, and I lay back down, my eyes heavy with sleep. But just as I was about to drift off, I felt it, a cold breath against my ear, and a voice clear as day, whispering my name. "James." I shot out of bed, my pulse racing. There was no one there, but I knew what I had heard. The room was colder now, the temperature dropping rapidly. My breath came out in visible puffs of air, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I grabbed my phone, desperate to call the front desk, to get out of this room, but there was no signal. The screen flickered, then went dark, and no matter how many times I pressed the power button, it refused to turn back on. Panic set in. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of this cursed room. But as I moved toward the door, I felt a force pushing against me, like a wall of cold air that refused to let me pass. The temperature continued to drop, and I could see frost forming on the windows, creeping in like a spider's web. And then, the whispering started again, louder this time, more insistent. It was all around me, voices overlapping, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. But one word stood out, repeated over and over, clear as day. "Stay, stay, stay." I backed away, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The walls seemed to close in on me, the room growing smaller, tighter, suffocating. And then, I saw them. Figures, pale and translucent, emerging from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. They were everywhere, their eyes hollow, and their faces twisted in anguish. They reached out to me with bony hands, their fingers cold as ice as they brushed against my skin. I screamed, backing up against the wall, but there was nowhere to go. The figures surrounded me, their whispers growing louder, filling my head with their tortured voices. I felt something cold wrap around my wrist, pulling me forward. I tried to fight it, to break free, but the grip was too strong. The figures closed in, their faces inches from mine, their breath cold and foul, and then everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor, my body numb and my mind foggy. The room was quiet again, the figures gone, as if they had never been there. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. I struggled to my feet, my legs weak and unsteady. The door was still there, still closed, but the oppressive force that had held me back was gone. I grabbed my suitcase, not caring about the rest of my belongings, and bolted for the door. The hallway was just as dim and silent as before, but I didn't care. I ran for the elevator, my heart pounding in my chest, the echoes of those whispers still ringing in my ears. When I reached the lobby, the clerk was still there, his pale eyes watching me with that same unsettling gaze. He didn't say a word as I handed him the key, my hands shaking. "I'm checking out," I said, my voice hoarse and trembling. He nodded, his expression unreadable. I trust you had an interesting stay." I didn't respond. I just wanted to get out, to put as much distance between myself and that cursed hotel as possible. As I stepped outside into the cold night air, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, the oppressive presence of the hotel finally fading. But the memories of that night would never leave me. The whispers, the figures, the icy grip of death. I could still feel them, lurking just at the edges of my mind. I never spoke of what happened in room 666. Who would believe me? It would be written off as a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. But I know the truth. The Grand Meridian Hotel isn't just a place for weary travelers to rest their heads. It's a prison, a trap for lost souls. And room 666. Room 666 is where they wait, where they whisper, where they reach out and drag you into their world. And if you're not careful, you might never leave. It was supposed to be just one night. One night at a small, out-of-the-way inn on my way to a conference in a town whose name I've already forgotten. But that night turned into something I can never forget, no matter how hard I try. The Cursed Inn. That's what they called it. I didn't know that at the time, of course. To me, it was just the Hollow Creek Inn, an old quaint building that stood on the edge of a dense forest, its windows dark and lifeless against the fading twilight. I'd driven past it many times on previous trips, but this was the first time I needed to stop for the night. The innkeeper was an older woman, frail and hunched over, with a voice that rasped like dry leaves scraping across pavement. She seemed surprised to see me, as if guests were a rare occurrence. Her pale eyes studied me for a moment before she handed me an old-fashioned key. "Room 12, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Top of the stairs, last room on the left." I nodded, trying to ignore the strange sense of unease that crept over me as I took the key from her bony hand. The lobby was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of mildew and dust. It was as if the place had been forgotten by time, left to wither and decay in the shadows. "Is there anyone else staying here tonight?" I asked, more to make conversation than anything else. She shook her head slowly. "No, you're the only guest." Her words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding, but I brushed it off as my imagination running wild. I had been on the road for hours, after all. I thanked her and made my way up the creaky wooden stairs, each step echoing in the silence of the inn. The hallway on the second floor was even darker than the lobby, the only light coming from a single flickering bulb at the far end. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing patches of mold beneath, and the carpet was threadbare, worn down by years of neglect. Room 12, the last room on the left. I paused in front of the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. For a moment I considered turning back, getting in my car, and driving to the next town. But that seemed ridiculous. It was just an old inn, nothing more. I was tired, and all I needed was a good night's sleep. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small, with a single bed covered in a faded quilt, a rickety chair by the window, and an old wooden dresser against one wall. A large mirror hung above the dresser, its glass cloudy and cracked. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of age and disuse. I set my bag down on the bed and looked around. It wasn't much, but it would do for the night. I closed the door behind me, locking it out of habit, and went to the window. It overlooked the forest, the trees swaying gently in the evening breeze. The darkness beyond the glass felt almost alive, as if it were watching me, waiting for me to turn my back. I shook off the feeling and pulled the curtains closed. It wasn't long before I started to notice the oddities. Little things at first, like the way the temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly, or the faint, almost imperceptible whispering that I couldn't quite place. I told myself it was just the wind, the creaking of an old building settling into the night. But then there was the mirror. As I unpacked my things, I found myself drawn to it, unable to look away. There was something off about the reflection, something wrong. The room in the mirror seemed different, somehow. Darker. The shadows were deeper, and the corners of the room seemed to stretch out, like the walls were pulling away from each other. And then I saw it. A flicker of movement in the reflection. Just a brief flash, a shadow passing behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. But the room was empty. There was no one there. I turned back to the mirror, but whatever I had seen was gone. It was just my reflection staring back at me, pale and wide-eyed, my breath fogging the glass. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me, but it clung to me like a second skin. I told myself it was just the exhaustion, the stress of the long drive. I needed sleep, that was all. Once I got some rest, everything would be fine. But sleep didn't come easily. The bed was lumpy, the sheets scratchy, and every time I closed my eyes, I could feel that presence in the room with me. Watching, waiting. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, but the words were just out of reach, a garbled mess of sound that sent shivers down my spine. I tossed and turned, unable to find any comfort in the bed. The darkness seemed to press in on me, suffocating, and I found myself staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster to keep my mind occupied. And then, around midnight, it happened. I jumped back, my heart leaping into my throat. The knock came again, louder this time, shaking the door on its hinges. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. Another knock and then another, each one more forceful than the last. The door rattled, and I could see the doorknob twisting as if someone, or something, was trying to get in. Panic took over, and I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the room for something, anything, to defend myself with. But there was nothing, just the old furniture and the cracked mirror. The knocking stopped suddenly, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, waiting for whatever was outside to make its move. But instead of another knock, I heard something else, a voice, a low, raspy whisper, coming from right behind me. "Get out!" I spun around, my eyes wide with terror. The room was empty, but the voice was still there, echoing in my ears. "Get out, before it's too late!" The voice was coming from the mirror. I stared at my reflection, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. The reflection wasn't mine, not anymore. The figure in the mirror was pale, gaunt, its eyes hollow and sunken. It was me, but twisted, distorted, as if the mirror were showing me a version of myself that had been drained of life. And then it smiled, a cold, cruel smile that sent a jolt of fear through me. "Get out," it whispered again, its voice no longer mine. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The air in the room was suffocating, heavy with the stench of decay. I could feel it closing in on me, the darkness wrapping around me like a shroud. I had to get out, now. I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock as my hands trembled uncontrollably. The moment the door swung open, I was hit with a blast of cold air that nearly knocked me off my feet. The hallway was pitch black, the only light coming from the faint glow of my room. But I didn't care. I ran, my footsteps echoing in the silence as I raced down the stairs and into the lobby. The innkeeper was nowhere to be seen, and I didn't stop to look for her. I threw open the front door and rushed outside, the cold night air biting into my skin as I stumbled toward my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly that I dropped them twice before finally getting the door open. I jumped inside, slamming the door shut behind me, and started the engine. I didn't look back as I sped away from the inn, the tires screeching on the gravel road. The dark trees loomed on either side of me, their branches clawing at the sky like twisted fingers. It wasn't. When I first arrived at the Blackwood Hotel, I had no idea what I was walking into. It was a place shrouded in mystery and steeped in history, the kind of building that had seen too much and told too little. From the outside, it looked like any other old, decaying hotel, its once grand facade now faded and worn, the windows dusty and dark. But I was desperate for a place to stay, and it was the only option available. I pulled up to the entrance, the tires of my car crunching on the gravel driveway. The night was thick with fog, the air damp and heavy as I stepped out. There was something unsettling about the way the mist clung to the building, as if it was trying to hide it from view. I hesitated for a moment, staring up at the looming structure before finally making my way inside. The lobby was dimly lit, the flickering light of a single chandelier casting long shadows across the cracked marble floor. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, the intricate patterns barely visible beneath the layers of grime. It was clear that the hotel had seen better days, but there was a strange sense of grandeur that still lingered, like an old ghost that refused to leave. A bell sat on the reception desk, tarnished and worn, and I rang it with some hesitation. The sound echoed through the empty lobby, reverberating off the walls before fading into silence. After a few moments, a man appeared from the back room. He was tall and thin, with hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes that seemed to peer right through me. His clothes were neat but outdated, like he had stepped out of another era. "Welcome to the Blackwood Hotel," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "How can I help you?" "I need a room for the night," I replied, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness of the lobby. He nodded, his expression unreadable as he reached for a key behind the desk. "Room 213, top floor, last room on the right." I thanked him and took the key, noting how cold it felt in my hand. The man watched me with those piercing eyes as I made my way to the elevator, his presence lingering in the back of my mind long after I had left the lobby. The elevator was an old, creaky thing, the kind that rattles and shakes as it ascends. The doors groaned shut behind me, and I pressed the button for the top floor. The ride was slow, each floor passing by with a dull clunk as the elevator struggled to climb. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional groan of the metal cables. When the doors finally slid open, I stepped out into a dimly lit hallway. The carpet was threadbare, the walls lined with dusty sconces that cast weak pools of light. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and old wood, and the silence was oppressive, like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. Room 213 was at the end of the hall, just as the man had said. I paused in front of the door, the key heavy in my hand, as I stared at the tarnished brass numbers. There was a strange sense of foreboding that crept over me, a feeling that I couldn't quite shake. But I told myself it was just the atmosphere of the place. Old buildings had a way of getting under your skin. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with a single bed, a wooden dresser, and a faded armchair by the window. The wallpaper was peeling in places, revealing patches of cracked plaster beneath. A large mirror hung on the wall opposite the bed, its glass cloudy and dull. The only light came from a small lamp on the bedside table, casting long shadows across the room. I set my bag down on the bed and glanced around. There was something off about the room, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It felt wrong. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and there was a faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. I shook off the feeling and tried to settle in. It had been a long day, and I was exhausted. All I wanted was to get some sleep and leave this place behind in the morning. But sleep didn't come easily. As I lay in bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling, I began to notice the sounds. At first, they were faint, just the creaking of the old building settling into the night. But then they grew louder, more distinct. Footsteps echoing down the hallway outside my door, the soft murmur of voices just beyond the range of comprehension. And then, the sound of something scratching at the walls. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the lamp. I listened, straining to hear where the sounds were coming from, but they seemed to be all around me, closing in. And then I saw it, a shadow, flickering at the edge of my vision. I turned to look, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room, the darkness pressing in from all sides. But the shadow came again, this time closer. It flitted across the wall, disappearing behind the dresser before reappearing near the door. It moved with a strange, jerky motion, like something that didn't quite belong in this world. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I watched it move. And then, the whispers started. They were soft at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but they grew louder, more insistent, the words just out of reach. It was like a chorus of voices, all speaking at once, overlapping and blending together into a cacophony of sound. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but I knew they were speaking to me, calling to me. I tried to ignore them, to push the sounds and shadows out of my mind, but it was impossible. They were everywhere, surrounding me, closing in. And then, the mirror. I hadn't noticed it at first, but the mirror was wrong. The reflection wasn't right. The room in the mirror was darker, the shadows deeper, and there was something else. A figure standing just behind me. I whipped around, but the room was empty. There was no one there. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there, watching me. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and dark. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her hair loose and tangled around her shoulders. She stared at me through the glass, her expression blank, but her eyes were filled with a terrible sadness. And then she spoke. "Help me." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the noise like a knife. I could feel her desperation, her pain, radiating from the mirror. It was overwhelming, suffocating. "Help me," she repeated, her voice cracking with emotion. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, to get out of that room and never look back. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, trapped by her gaze. She reached out, her hand pressing against the glass. I could see the outline of her fingers, the way they left smudges on the surface of the mirror. She was so close, and yet so far away. "Please, help me." Her voice broke, and I felt a surge of emotion that wasn't my own. Grief, despair, terror. It washed over me like a tidal wave, drowning me in its intensity. I couldn't take it anymore. I stumbled back, away from the mirror, my heart racing. The room seemed to spin around me, the shadows twisting and warping into grotesque shapes. The whispers grew louder, the voices overlapping and merging into a single, deafening scream. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor, the cold surface pressing against my cheek. The room was silent, the air heavy with the scent of dust and decay. I struggled to my feet, my head pounding as I tried to make sense of what had happened. The mirror was shattered, shards of glass scattered across the floor. But the woman was gone. The room felt empty, lifeless, as if whatever had been haunting it had finally left. I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door, my heart still racing. I didn't stop to look back as I fled the room, my footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. The elevator ride down was agonizingly slow, each clunk of the gears sending a jolt of fear through me. When I reached the lobby, it was empty. The man at the reception desk was gone. The only sound, the faint hum of the old building settling into the night. I didn't waste any time. I ran out of the hotel, the cold night air biting into my skin as I sprinted to my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking as I finally got the door open and jumped inside. I drove away as fast as I could, the tires screeching on the gravel as I sped down the winding road. The hotel disappeared into the fog behind me, swallowed by the darkness. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, the lights of civilization finally piercing through the thick fog. I pulled into a gas station, my hands still trembling as I sat behind the wheel, trying to calm myself down. What had happened back? I wasn't planning on staying in the old Marlowe Hotel. In fact, I hadn't even known it existed until I found myself lost on that desolate stretch of highway, far from the city and any familiar landmarks. The night was closing in, the inky darkness swallowing up the road ahead, and my GPS had long since given up trying to guide me back to civilization. I was tired, frustrated, and more than a little unnerved by the vast emptiness around me. When I saw the faint glow of lights through the trees, I almost didn't believe it. But there it was, the Marlowe Hotel looming out of the fog like a ghostly apparition. The building was massive, its once grand architecture now crumbling and overgrown with vines. A faded sign hung crookedly above the entrance, barely legible in the dim light. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts screaming at me to keep driving. But where would I go? The road stretched out behind me, a long, empty ribbon of asphalt with no end in sight. And the thought of spending the night in my car, alone in the middle of nowhere, was even less appealing than the dilapidated hotel in front of me. So I pulled into the cracked parking lot, the tires crunching over gravel as I made my way to the entrance. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of decay and something else I couldn't quite place. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, the creak of the hinges echoing through the empty lobby. The inside of the hotel was just as eerie as the outside. Dust covered every surface, and the once luxurious furnishings were now faded and worn. A grand staircase dominated the center of the room, its red carpet threadbare and moth-eaten. Faded paintings hung crookedly on the walls, their subjects obscured by layers of grime. There was no one at the reception desk, but a bell sat on the counter, tarnished and forgotten. I hesitated for a moment before reaching out to ring it, the sound cutting through the silence like a knife. The echo lingered for longer than it should have, bouncing off the walls of the empty lobby. I waited, listening to the sound as it faded into the distance. For a moment I thought no one would come, but then I heard footsteps, a slow, deliberate shuffle that sent a shiver down my spine. A man appeared from the shadows, his figure barely visible in the dim light. He was old, with a stooped back and thinning hair. His clothes were neat but outdated, the kind of attire that might have been fashionable 50 years ago. He moved slowly, as if each step was a great effort, and his eyes were hollow, sunken deep into his skull. "Welcome to the Marlowe Hotel," he said in a voice that was little more than a rasp. "Are you looking for a room?" I nodded, unable to find my voice. There was something off about him, something that made my skin crawl. But I couldn't leave now, not after coming this far. I needed a place to stay, just for the night. He handed me a key, the cold metal heavy in my hand. "Room 607, he said, his gaze never leaving mine. "Top floor. Enjoy your stay." I muttered a thank you and hurried away, my footsteps echoing through the empty lobby. The elevator was out of order, of course, so I made my way to the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The air grew colder as I ascended, and the silence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. By the time I reached the 6th floor, I was out of breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway was long and narrow, lined with closed doors that seemed to watch me as I passed. The carpet was threadbare here, too, the pattern worn away by countless footsteps over the years. A single light flickered overhead, casting long shadows that danced on the walls. Room 607 was at the far end of the hall, just as the old man had said. I stood in front of the door for a moment, the key heavy in my hand. There was something about this place, something that made my skin prickle with unease. But I was too tired to care. I just wanted to sleep. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The bed was neatly made, the white sheets yellowed with age. A single window overlooked the parking lot, the glass fogged with condensation. The air was musty, thick with the scent of mildew and dust. There was a heavy silence that hung in the air, as if the room itself was holding its breath. I set my bag down on the bed and glanced around. The furniture was old, worn, and covered in a thin layer of dust. A large mirror hung on the wall opposite the bed, its surface cloudy and streaked. The wallpaper was peeling in places, revealing patches of cracked plaster beneath. The room felt oppressive, as if the walls were closing in around me. But I was too exhausted to care. I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the bed, the springs creaking under my weight. The mattress was lumpy and uncomfortable, but I didn't have the energy to move. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the eerie silence, and waited for sleep to take me. But sleep didn't come. Instead, I lay there, staring up at the cracked ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the hotel around me. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows in their frames. And then there was something else. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper, barely audible, but it was there. Just at the edge of my consciousness, I sat up, straining to hear it. The room was silent, but the whisper persisted, growing louder, more insistent. It was coming from the hallway. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. But curiosity got the better of me. I got up, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet, and slowly opened the door. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the flickering bulb overhead. The whisper was louder now, a soft, hissing sound that seemed to be coming from somewhere down the hall. I stepped out of my room, the cold air biting into my skin as I followed the sound. As I moved deeper into the hallway, the whisper grew clearer, more distinct. It wasn't just a sound. It was words, voices, overlapping and blending together into a cacophony of sound. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but there was something about them, something that made my skin crawl. I stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. Room 613. The whisper was loudest here, seeping through the cracks in the door, filling the air with a strange, otherworldly energy. My hand hovered over the doorknob, hesitating for just a moment before I turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, empty room. The air was thick with dust, the floor covered in a fine layer of dirt. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled and stained. A single window overlooked the parking lot, the glass cracked and smeared with grime. But it wasn't the state of the room that caught my attention. It was the figure standing in the corner. At first I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the light. But as I stepped closer, I realized it was a person. A woman, her back to me, her hair loose and tangled around her shoulders. She was wearing a long, tattered dress, the fabric worn and frayed at the edges. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the wall, her body unnaturally still. I took another step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Are you okay?" Still, she didn't move. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched her shoulder. The moment my fingers brushed her skin, she turned. Her face, oh God, her face. It was pale, almost translucent, her eyes sunken deep into her skull. Her mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile, her lips cracked and dry. But it was her eyes that terrified me the most. They were hollow, empty, like black holes that seemed to suck in all the light around them. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Just a soft, rasping whisper, like the rustle of dry leaves in the wind. And then, she was gone. I stumbled back, my heart racing as I tried to make sense of what I had just seen. The room was empty, the whispering voices gone. The only sound was the wind howling outside, rattling the windows in their frames. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. I bolted from the room, my footsteps echoing through the empty hallway. As I raced back to my own room, I slammed the door shut behind me, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. I leaned against the door, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. What the hell had just happened? Who was that woman? And why did she look so wrong? I glanced around the room, my eyes darting to every shadow, every corner, as if expecting her to appear again. But the room was empty, the oppressive silence settling over me like a heavy blanket. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I